Chapter 120. Shizun goes into seclusion. The first light of dawn painted the clouds red. Though it was still early, a large number of disciples had already gathered outside the Red Lotus Pavilion. They lined the sides of the pathway in their white mourning robes, their heads lowered and eyes downcast. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of the morning bell rang out from the heaven-piercing tower. Several figures could be seen walking slowly in the distance, bearing a coffin. Chu Wanning and the Tanlang elder walked in front, followed by Moran and Chu Meng. Shimei and a monk dressed in worn robes walked on either side. They approached slowly through the morning fog, following the dew-slick bluestone path. The monk held a lantern. Even in the light of dawn, the lantern's brilliant glow was visible. It emitted a dazzling golden radiance, like summer blossoms. The gathered disciples lowered their heads solemnly, scarcely daring to breathe. They'd all heard that Master Huaizui of Wubei Temple had hastened over for the sake of the Yuheng elder. This unassuming monk must be him. The juniors' reverence towards such a legendary figure far outweighed their curiosity. No one dared look too closely as he made his way up the long mountain path. Thus, the great master passed by these reverent disciples, an airy billow of robes in his wake. His passage, for them, was marked by the tapping of his monk's stick and the occasional glimpse of hemp-woven shoes in their downcast gazes. The coffin was steadily carried the whole way, yet this was not a burial, but a revival. No one wept. As they reached the Red Lotus Pavilion, Huaizui looked around, then said, "Next to the lotus pond, that will do. There's an abundance of spiritual energy there, suitable for spells." "All right, you heard the great master." Chu Wanning, leading the others, set the black ice coffin down beside the lotus pond. "Great master, if there's anything you require, only say the word. Saving Yuheng is as good as saving my own life. If there's anything I can do, I will." "Many thanks for Chu Changmeng's kindness," Huaizui said. "This humble monk requires nothing at the moment, but will be sure to inform the sect leader should the need arise." "Of course, please do not hesitate." Huaizui smiled. He pressed his palms together and bowed respectfully to Chu Wanning, then turned to address the others who stood nearby. "This humble monk is unskilled and will need 5 years to bring back Elder Chu's soul. So that this humble monk may not be disturbed, the Red Lotus Pavilion will be closed to visitors from today until Elder Chu's revival." Though Chu Meng had already heard that it would take 5 years for his Shizun to return, at Huaizui's reminder, the rims of his eyes grew red once more, and he hung his head in silence. "If anyone has any parting words they wish to say to Elder Chu, please do so now. There will be no opportunity otherwise for over 1,000 days." And so they stepped forward one by one. Chu Wanning and the Sisheng Peak elders went first, each taking their turn to stand solemnly before the coffin and say their farewells. Chu Wanning said, "Let us meet again soon." Tanlang said, "Wake up soon." Chuanji said, "Hope everything goes well." And Lukun said, with a sigh, "I kinda envy you, frozen in time for 5 years like this and not aging a day." The rest of the elders all said their piece, some with long spiels and some with short ones. In no time it was Chu Meng's turn. Chu Meng had every intention of holding it together, but the young man had always been ruled by emotions, and this was no exception. He stood next to Chu Wanning's coffin and began to cry. Between sobs, while vigorously wiping away his tears, he managed to choke out, "Shizun, I'll try hard. Even without you around, I definitely won't embarrass you at the spiritual mountain competition. I'll tell you all about how high I ranked when you wake up. My Shizun has no losers among his disciples after all. Chu Wanning walked over and clapped his son on the shoulder. Meng didn't cling to his father as he usually did, instead turning away with a sniffle. In front of his Shizun, he didn't want to look yet again like a useless, spoiled child who relied on his father for every little thing. Next was Shimei. His eyes were wet as well, but he didn't say anything. He only looked at Chu Wanning for a time with his head bowed, before quietly backing away. After Shimei retreated, a pale pink haitang blossom was placed gently into the coffin. The slender hand that held it, though still youthful, was already approaching the length and span of an adult's. Moran stood at the coffin's side. A breeze danced over the surface of the water in the pond, carrying the softly sweet fragrance of blooming lotuses. The breeze tousled his bangs, and when he lifted his hand, it was to brush Chu Wanning's face. Moran pressed his lips together. He looked as if he had many things he wanted to say, but in the end, all that came out, soft and slightly hoarse, was, "I'll wait for you." Wait for what? He didn't specify. He'd considered saying, "I'll wait for you to wake up," but those words seemed somehow insufficient. There was no way to express the feelings close to bursting the vessel of his chest, as though there was a pool of scalding lava in his heart, trapped and rolling, slamming against the walls and bringing him pain and anxiety. It felt like it was only a matter of time before those walls were breached and the lava would spill out uncontrollably, the raging flow melting him to ash. But even now, he was still unsure what that burning feeling was, so he only said, "I'll wait for you." With this, the Red Lotus Pavilion was shut and barred. An enormous barrier came down like a gate, separating life from death, denying entry to all. For the next 5 years, no one would be allowed the fragrance of lotus blossoms in the summer, nor the quiet solitude of winter snow within the pavilion. Bamboo leaves rustled in the wind, and haitang blossoms drifted slowly to the ground. From outside the Red Lotus Pavilion, all the way to the main gate, disciples dropped to their knees and bowed. At the end of this vast river were Moran, Meng, and Shimei. Chu Wanning announced in a booming voice that rang throughout the skies and forests, "Wishing Yuheng Elder well in his seclusion." The disciples, their heads bent to the ground, echoed solemnly, "Wishing Yuheng Elder well in his seclusion." Thousands of overlapping voices rose as one, rumbling from the mist-shrouded Sisheng Peak and startling birds into flight. Their calls filled the sky as they circled the treetops, afraid to land. The mass of voices rose heavenward, rolling like thunder through streaming clouds, wishing Shizun well in his seclusion. Moran said in a soft voice. He bowed for a long time, 5 years of waiting. After Yuheng went into seclusion, each of his 3 disciples, unwilling to take another elder as their teacher, even temporarily, trained and cultivated on their own. For various reasons, aptitude, cultivation path, other such factors, Shimei and Meng stayed at the peak. Moran chose to travel. It was true that he really did learn better through experience, but that wasn't the only reason for his choice. So many things had turned out differently in this reborn life. Beyond Chu Wanning's unexpected death, Moran was also still greatly worried about the fake Gojin. He suspected that the person behind all this might have been reborn too. After all, whoever it was, they were arguably quite proficient with the Qianlong chess formation, yet no one else in his previous lifetime, all the way up until he'd taken his own life, had been capable of utilizing this forbidden technique to the extent he'd witnessed in the course of their repeated encounters. Moran had no talent for sleuthing. Ever since the battle at Butterfly Town, the entire cultivation world had been on high alert, waiting and watching for that mysterious actor to slip up and expose themselves. He didn't really need to get involved. Moran knew he wasn't exactly smart. His strength lay in his abundance of spiritual energy and his natural aptitude for cultivation. Since a future confrontation was likely inevitable, the most productive thing he could do right now was to recover his pre-birth battle prowess as soon as possible. In his last life, he had been a destroyer. In this one, he wanted to be a protector. Not long after Chu Wanning went into seclusion, Moran stood before the main gate of Sisheng Peak, a travel bag slung over his back, ready to set off on his journey. Only a few people had come to see him off: Chu Chengyong, Madame Wang, and Xi Mei. Chu Chengyong clapped him on the shoulder and said, a little awkwardly, "Meng won't be coming," he said. Moran chuckled. "He said he'd be too busy training in the forest to see me off, right?" After a brief, mortified silence, Chu Chengyong swore. "That thoughtless brat." Moran smiled. He's got his heart set on the first place at the spiritual mountain competition. It's only natural he's diligent about training. I leave it to him to add some glory to Shizun's name. Chu Chengyong looked at Moran, then said, hesitant, "The spiritual mountain competition is the foremost tournament in the world of traditional cultivation. I'm sure Runner will grow and learn much in his travels, but the competition will probably bar the kind of hodgepodge techniques you're going to pick up out there. It'd be a pity if you end up missing out because of that." "My cousin's got it covered," Moran replied. "Don't you want to make a name for yourself?" At that, Moran actually burst out laughing. Make a name for himself? In his previous life, he had missed the spiritual mountain competition because he had committed some wrongdoings and had been punished with confinement. He had always felt resentment over it, but now that same thing seemed so insignificant. What did it even matter? He was someone who had seen so much death and so many partings, awash in an endless flood of trials and tribulations. He was someone who had gone from defiant to hopeful, from hopeful to resentful, from resentful to relieved, and from relieved to remorseful. The Moran of the present no longer cared for beauties and fine wines, or the worship of the masses, much less for things like revenge or the thrill of killing and destruction. He had already seen for himself the boundless opulence and luxuries at the apex of the world, and he had grown tired of it all. He didn't want to go back to such a cold place with no one by his side. After all, he had once been the Emperor Taxianjun. He had stood upon the mightiest peak with the world in the palm of his hand, and so he had seen all there was to see. Of course he wouldn't care about trifling things like some measly applause or a couple of cheers at the spiritual mountain competition. And as for the ranking, whoever wanted it was welcome to it. "There are other things I'd rather do," Moran said with a smile. "Sure, Meng is a young master, and young masters have their own lifestyles. I'm just a loafer, and loafers lead their own loafing lives." Madame Wang chided gently. "Silly child, what are you saying? You're not different from Menger. What's with young master this and loafer that?" Moran laughed cheekily, but felt a small pang inside. One had been born into the lap of luxury, while the other was of low and petty birth. Although he had been so immensely fortunate as to wind up here at Sisheng Peak, he had nevertheless spent the first 10 or so years of his life in a murky haze. How could he and his cousin possibly be the same? But he couldn't really say any of that to Madame Wang, not when she was looking at him with that gentle, concerned expression. So he only nodded and said, "Auntie is right, I misspoke." Madame Wang shook her head with a smile and handed him a small jiankun pouch embroidered with pollia flowers. "You'll have to look after yourself while you travel. Take this. It's filled with all kinds of medicine for treating injuries. I compounded them myself, so they're more effective than what you can buy in any store. Make sure to keep it safe." "Thanks a lot, Auntie," Moran said gratefully. Shimei spoke next. "I don't have much of anything to give you besides this jade pendant. Here, wear it. It warms your spiritual core." In Moran's hand, the white jade was creamy smooth and warm to the touch, an exceedingly rare, high-grade item. He hurriedly pressed the jade pendant back into Shimei's hand. "I can't accept this. It's far too valuable. Besides, my spiritual core is fire elemental to start with. If it's warmed any further, I might have a chi deviation." Shimei laughed. "Don't be silly. What do you mean chi deviation?" "In any case, I'm not taking it." Moran stood firm. "You have a weak constitution. It'll do you more good than it would me." "But I had someone purchase it at the Chuanyuan Pavilion auction just for you." Moran felt warm at his words, but more than that, his heart ached for him. "Then it must have been really expensive. This jade pendant really won't do much for me, but it'd be great for you. Shimei, I appreciate the thought, but please keep it for yourself, and remember to wear it so it can nourish your spiritual energy." Before Shimei could reply, Moran uncoiled the thin cord and looped the jade pendant around Shimei's neck. "It looks good on you," he said with a grin, then lifted a hand to pat him on the shoulder. "Much better than it would on me. I'm such a rough and tumble kind of person. I'd probably break something like that in 2 days." "Runner is right. The jade pendant can be worn by anyone, but it's best for people with water elemental spiritual cores. Mayor, you should keep it." Now that even Madame Wang has spoken, of course Shimei had to concede. He nodded and said to Moran, "Take care of yourself then." "Don't worry, I'll write to you often." Despite his sorrow at having to say goodbye so soon, Shimei couldn't help but smile at that. "You do realize only Shizun can read your handwriting, right?" The mention of Chu Wanning left Moran with a feeling he couldn't describe. The hatred that had gnawed at his very bones had dissipated, but the remorse lingered, like a wound scabbing over, a dull, itchy ache in his heart. Holding that feeling in his chest, Moran set off down the mountain alone. 1, 2, 3. He counted in his head as he walked, head bowed. 101, 102, 103. At the foot of the mountain, he couldn't help but look back towards Sisheng Peak, shrouded among the high clouds, up the long flight of stone steps that seemed to rise without end. He murmured, 3,799. He had counted as he walked. That was the number of steps to the main gate, the number of steps that Chu Wanning had climbed that day, carrying him on his back. He was certain that for as long as he lived, he would never forget Chu Wanning's hands, cold as ice, chafed raw and bloody. The truth of the matter was, whether a person did good or committed evil was rarely ever a feature of their inherent nature. Each person was like a plot of farmland. Some were lucky, and their fields were sowed with grain, which, come autumn, would bear an abundant harvest, paddies awash with their gentle fragrance of rice, fields of wheat rolling in the wind like waves. Looking out on the land, one would find it to be good and praiseworthy. But others were not so lucky. Their fields were planted with poppy seeds, and the spring breeze brought only the miasma of intoxicated sin and euphoric decadence, filling the skies and blanketing the land with that vile, bloody red and gold. The people abhorred it, cursed it, and feared it, even as they indulged in its blissful stupor, rotting away before its filthy stench. In the end, the righteous and upstanding would gather to set fire to the field, and as the twisting smoke rose into the sky, they would say, "Oh, he was a breeding ground of sin. He was a demonic fiend. He was vicious and ruthless. He had no conscience. He deserved it." All while he convulsed in the blaze, crying out in pain, as the poppies shriveled into a charred, muddy morass. But this person had once been a plot of good farmland too. He had once wanted nothing more than water and sunlight. Who was it who had planted that first seed of darkness? Who sowed the disaster that grew out of control? That plot of land, once temperate and lush, went up in flames and sank into ash, laid fallow. Moran was a plot of unwanted, abandoned land. He never thought someone would come into his life to plough these fields again, would give him a second chance. Chu Wanning. It would be 5 years before he could see him again. Today was day 1. He found himself already missing Chu Wanning's face, his stern, angry, gentle, serious, steadfast face. Moran slowly closed his eyes. He recalled his lives, past and present, so many bygone days scattering like snow in the wind. He realized that the Heavenly Rift incident had in fact been the greatest crossroads of his life. In his last life, he had loved someone dearly. Later, that person had given up his life, and Moran had fallen into hell. In this life, there was someone who loved and protected him. Later, that person had given up his life and brought Moran back to the world of the living.